Insulin and skip loading. Now, you may think, oh, how obvious. I'm so glad that skip is now coming around to my side of thinking, because I would have thought of this 6 years ago. Yay for you. I thought it as well. I tried it. Just didn't see the reason for it, and I didn't see the results. Quite possibly because I didn't do it for a long time. But I think it had more to do with timing, because I only hit it once or twice. And when I say hit it, I'm not talking about your mom. I'm talking about insulin, because I hit your mom way more than that. But anyway, that's another chapter. The insulin and skip loading, how should I say, is insane. It really has made if anything with skip loading has changed dramatically in the last 6 years, since I last discussed skip loading on the last DVD, it is for sure insulin. Now, it's not just as simple as, oh, add insulin to skip load. Yeah, it's so awesome. What it is this. The timing, I'm going to give it, I'm going to give it all to you. I'm going to give away the timing and the dosing and everything else. Quite frankly, so that you can decide whether you want to use it yourself. I will just say this. I am not advocating nor condoning the use of insulin, especially if you don't know what the hell you're doing. Okay, I don't think it's an innocuous compound, but I also don't think that it's as dangerous as most people think. It's used by, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people a day who are diabetic, and to be used by someone who wants to store more glycogen, wants to take advantage of the anabolic properties and that sort of thing, has a fully functioning pancreas, which quite frankly, and I may get absolutely destroyed for this, but I've never been one to keep my opinions to myself. I firmly believe that the use of insulin with skip loading or high carb days for bodybuilders, not just bodybuilders, but I'm talking about bodybuilders specifically because I'm a bodybuilder, is good for your body or good for your pancreas, because your pancreas doesn't have to kick out all that endogenous insulin. The exogenous use of insulin essentially is making your pancreas work less or not as hard, not as much of a demand, I guess you could say. This has been backed up by someone who I have a lot of respect for in the bodybuilding industry. More than a couple people, to be honest with you, but one in particular. However, I will not mention her name because I did not get the information directly from her. I got it through a couple other people that have worked with me in the past. And I will just say that she is known for her extensive knowledge, excuse me, in how insulin, not only just insulin use, but insulin use as it relates to bodybuilding, glycogen storage, things like that. So that doesn't necessarily mean it's right either. Doesn't mean she's right, doesn't mean I'm right. I'm giving you my opinion, based on my experience and logic, quite frankly. So insulin and skip loading, I'm going to take the example of a 12-hour skip load just to give you some reference for dosing, timing, and that sort of thing. First, I believe in using fast-acting insulin. And I understand that, Skip, the question could be, well, Skip, if you're loading over 12 hours, then why wouldn't you use a slower acting so that you can sustain those levels? Look, I don't want to turn this into rocket science. I don't want to have to try to figure out, clearance times, not just clearance times, but how those clearance times differ from individual to individual. If it were just me that I was trying to figure out my loading and my insulin and everything else, yay. I would probably come up with a great way, and feel that I have, but I would try to tweak it and make it perfect for me. I'm in a position where I train hundreds of people, have trained thousands over the years, and I have to give out information that is individualized for clients under my supervision. And many of you who are going to watch this DVD as an example, or read an article, or read a post that I put up on social media, or a post that I put up on intensemuscle.com. So this information is going to go across a very broad population of people, or not just one demographic. I mean, we're talking about different ages, different body types, somatotypes, different levels of experience with training, different understanding of supplements, different supplement use, medications that I can't possibly know what every person that will hear this information or read information, I won't know what they're taking, what they're doing that may contraindicate or be some kind of issue by making those clearance times shorter, faster, or causing any types of problems. So, excuse me, I believe in the fast in and out. It's just easier to keep track of. It's also easier to not have, or less likely, I should say, to have an overlap from one dose to the next dose. I'm also very, very cautious and strongly recommend that anybody who uses insulin for skip loading starts with a very, very low dose. It's not a race. It's not a competition to see how big your dosages can get. Don't look at insulin as testosterone. In the industry or in the sport, we tend to kind of want to err on the side of, well, I'll just take more. If 600 milligrams of testosterone is good, 900 has to be awesome. Don't approach your insulin dosing this way. It's not necessarily a more is better. What it is you just want to make the process more efficient at packing away more carbohydrates. So even just 4 or 5 IU every 3 hours of a 12-hour load is going to help tremendously. Maybe 10 IU will help more. But it's not going to be so dramatic that you notice a difference between 5 and 10. Just as you're not going to notice much of a difference from 10 to 15. Okay, so what you're going to notice, or what you can notice with those larger doses, is the overlap. Okay, so, and I'll explain the overlap in just a second for those of you who don't follow what I'm saying. I recommend starting out for someone who is just, I am hell-bent on using this insulin. I'm not going to work under anybody's supervision. I want to do it, but I want to be super, super careful. I don't want anything to happen. Yay for you first, and this is what I recommend. If you're on a 12-hour load, dose your insulin at the start of your load, and then again 6 hours in. That essentially gives you 6 hours for each dose. I can almost guarantee, and I did say almost, but I can almost guarantee that if 1,000 people did that, not one person would have an overlap. Okay? Overlap basically means that the second dose crosses or overlaps the first dose. That means that the blood levels or your blood sugar levels are still being dramatically influenced and are low from the first dose when you take the second dose. Now, just because you have an overlap doesn't mean, oh my God, oh, this is terrible. That's not necessarily the case. Where you have to be careful with overlap is when you get into more frequent dosing that is closer together. Okay, my max parameters for clients and myself, and I say clients, not everybody, but this is a max frequency and window of time between doses is 3 hours. Okay? If you dose at the beginning, let's just say you start at 9 a.m. You dose at 9 a.m., you dose at noon, you dose at 3, you dose at 6, you dose again at 9. well, you wouldn't dose again at 9. So I got to be careful with my examples. You would take the last dose 3 hours before the end of your skip load. But anyway, where you get into problems with overlap is when you get into frequency, like every 3 to 4 hours dosing. You're not going to have much of an overlap from the first dose to the second. If you have a little bit, okay. Because of the amount of carbs that you're taking in, you should be covered fine because you're not going crazy on the dosing. I'm telling you and recommending and advising strongly, you don't go crazy on the dosing here. So, the overlap from the first dose to the second dose, not going to be a whole lot. But if there is an overlap, you likely could have even more of an overlap. It's almost like it builds from the second to the third dose. Then if you had an overlap from the first to the second to the third, you're probably going to have a little bit more of an overlap. This is where you start to run into problems. Not necessarily on the second to the third dose, but when you start to get into that fourth and potentially fifth dose, there you run the risk, even though you got a ton of carbs in you, you run more of a risk of that overlap later in the day than you do those first couple doses during the day. Plus, and this is important to note, you tend during a skip load to get more. Most people do, not everybody. Some people have it down and they just, I know exactly, I've done this for a long time, I know exactly what I can take in, that's great. That's not where you're going to run into problems. You're going to run into problems while you're figuring out and you're just starting the skip loading process as far as how many carbs you're actually getting in and whether that covers. When I discuss skip loading in its most essentially basic form, without using insulin, I always say you don't count carbs. You don't count them because you need to base how many carbs or how much food you need to take in on your skip load based on hunger. Hunger is a great gauge to tell you how depleted you are and how much food you need. You cannot do that with insulin. You can to a certain degree. I can't say you can't. What you have to be careful of when you're using insulin is you at the very least need to make sure that you're covered minimally. You cover the dose that you're taking in. If you're taking in 5, 6 IU, you're not going to have too much problem covering that. Okay? The old rule of 10 grams of carbs per IU is relatively safe. That won't keep, that was the old rule when, antiquated rule when people were using post-workout insulin. Okay, and if if you use post-workout insulin, yeah, good for you, but that's not, times have changed basically. So that was overkill, and it was known to be overkill, and it made a lot of people fat. But the top end was 10 grams of carbs per IU, and you knew that you were covered with that. Okay, it doesn't take that many grams of carbs to cover an IU of insulin. But nonetheless, you know you're safe with that. You're easily going to get in, as an example, 60 grams of carbs to cover those doses even if they're frequent throughout the day. We know that. My point is when your dosing gets up higher, maybe you push to 10 or 15 IU, maybe you're up to 20 IU as your dose is 3 to 4 hours apart throughout the day. You're going to have to make sure that you've got those carbs to cover that dose, and that's easier to do earlier in the day. You tend to have more of an appetite, you're not full, your stomach is wide open. First couple meals, not too bad. Once you get up to that 8th and 10th and 12th hour of skip loading, you got a lot of food in you. You're not terribly hungry, but it's different with insulin because you're not gauging how much you need to take in based as much on hunger as it is you got to cover your dosing. Okay, that's the first order of business. You got to cover your dosing of insulin. So, which is essentially another excellent reason you have to build into these doses. As far as I'm concerned, if you're over, and this is my max dosing, max frequency for insulin on a skip load day. If you're dosing every 3 to 4 hours and you're dosing 20 IU, that to me is a max. I've been there. I responded very well to it, but there's not much room for error. Okay? If for some reason you can't get a meal in, and even though you may not dose your next dose, you could have issues with overlap. So in a situation with high frequency, high dosing, and I consider every 3 to 4 hours, 20 IU is max, so 15 to 20 IU, I consider pretty much max dosing. My best advice is you sit your ass in your house and you don't go anywhere and you load that way routinely every week. That way there's really nothing that can happen outside of your house burning down or you miscalculating the amount of carbs you ate and your dumbass didn't go to the grocery store and halfway through the load you go to the cabinet and you don't have any blueberry. Blueberry's awesome. And it only comes out around in the fall with Frankenberry and Count Chocula for about a month. But anyway, you got to be planful. You got to have the carbs with you. You can't be running around going, oh, I'm going to stop at a restaurant, because you don't know what that service is going to be. You don't know if they're going to fuck your food up and have to bring it to you again. I mean, I've actually seen people sitting at IHOP, I've been with them, dose their insulin because they know them pancakes are coming in 5 minutes, like a dumbass. And then all of a sudden, fucking pancakes don't come in time. Their food doesn't come out, or their food is messed up and they got to take it back. Or the waitress drops them on the floor and insulin boy jumps on the ground and starts throwing the pancakes. Okay, that didn't happen. But anyway, you get my point. It's pretty important. And quite frankly, if I dosed insulin and she dropped pancakes on a pile of shit, I would be picking the pancake off of the pile of shit and dusting it off as best I could and eating it. Okay, because the alternative is really, really bad. The point is you have to be planful. It has to be an organized venture. You've got to have your food. You got to be smart about your dosing, because the alternative really is it's bad. It's insulin-induced coma at those dosages. Okay, very easy to counter. You just got to have carbs. Okay, but my best advice is do this at home. Make your own damn pancakes. It's cheaper anyway. Plus they're lower fat than anything you're going to get in a restaurant. Okay, I go out to restaurants too, and dosing insulin, you know, running out to the car and dosing your insulin after the food is sitting in front of you and things like that, or going to the bathroom. It's kind of a giant pain in the ass, and it is a gamble. Now, starting out on dosing, like I said, it's 6 hours. Let's say, because you may say, well, what if I only have like an 8-hour skip load? What would you recommend? At 8 hours, you should be able to, well, you'd start at 1. I mean, I always thought you got to start at 1, if for no other reason than if you're not familiar with insulin, just so that you feel better about it. Okay, I don't know how many people, you know, will tell me, hey, you know, I want to use insulin, and I set up the protocol for them very, very cautiously, 5 IU, 1 time, and they're very, very anxious about it. Okay, and anything that happens, like, yeah, you know, I think like 2 hours later, I think I started to go a little hypo, but then I had some candy and that was good. On 5 IU of insulin, you're not going hypo 3 hours later. It's just not gonna happen. Okay, as long as you get your carbs and everything. 5 IU it just isn't much. It's a very, very small dose. You take in any amount, damn near any amount of carbohydrate. All you have to do is get, you know, 40 or 50 grams of carbs. Hell, you'd probably be okay with 30, and you're good. It's covered. Okay. Now, you could dip in a couple hours or anything else, but it's not going to be anything that your body can't, the normal body won't adapt to anyway. As an example, just for reference, there are many, many, many times that myself and clients of mine have used injectable carnitine with 1 to 2 IU of insulin, pre-cardio fasted with no issue. None. Because the body can adjust to 1 to 2 IU of insulin without needing carbohydrate, without you needing to ingest carbohydrate at that time. Okay, you start to get up into the 4 and 5, and obviously that's a little different, but it doesn't take much to cover that dose. Okay, so 5 IU, 1 time, especially if you have like if you have anything over a 3 or 4 hour skip load, you can start with a 5 IU, 1 dose of insulin, and you'll be fine. It's a great place to start. Okay. From there, do not jump to 3-hour dosing or 3-hour frequency. Keep it as big as you can. I'd rather have people go with another dose, 4 to 5 hours, 6 hours is even great apart. See how you respond to that. Don't go up from the original 5 IU dose. Increase frequency first. Okay? That means increase the skip load, increase the frequency, but keep it at 5 IU. Get to that 3 to 4 hour dosing at 5 IU, and you've got your skip load up to 9 to 12 hours. Then you can start to play with the 5 IU dosing, taking it up from there. Okay? You probably would be okay to go to 10. You'd probably be okay to jump in intervals of 10. But if you want to play it safe, which I highly recommend, do it in intervals of like 3. Go from 5 to 8. Go from 8 to 11. Okay? Make those jumps. It's not a race. You don't have to get there fast. And you may not need those higher doses. What you want to do is this. You want to pay attention to what's going on. You want to pay attention to how full you get. You want to pay attention to how you feel the next day, what your condition is. Because I can tell you right now, one of the biggest things with using insulin with skip loading is you will not hold as much sub-Q water the next day. This is the first thing that made me go, what the hell? Like, holy crap. Like, my weight would be the same or damn close to the same, but I wasn't all watered over and puffy and essentially spill and spill from any of you that know my peaking protocol, which I'll get to later. I'm not going to discuss it in this chapter. And insulin plays a part in that as well. Where was I? The water the next day. You clear that sub-Q water so much faster, it's ridiculous. And for no other reason than it makes the process more efficient by using insulin to just jam-pack more carbs into the muscle. If you're packing more carbs away as glycogen, you need more water to do that. So it's not going to leave it under, or tend to leave it under the skin. Which makes the next point very, very important as well, and that's water intake. Okay? When you're eating all this, anybody who is skip loaded who's watching this knows it is difficult to get the recommended amount of water in, or your typical water intake that you would have any other day while you're skip loading. Okay? But you have to get that water in, because then it takes away from the efficiency of the process. Again, you're not going to, let's just say worst case scenario, you're dehydrated. Before a show is a fine example. You've already moved your water and you're dry as hell, but you need to load, good luck. You're not going to be able to do that unless you add a bunch of water back in, because there's no water to combine with the carbs to pack away those carbs as glycogen to fill you out. What fills you out? Not necessarily the carbs. It's the carbs combining with the water in the muscle. Okay? So, you got to have the water to get fuller, to pack away more carbs, and obviously you're going to need as much water, if not more, when you're using insulin, because the process is more efficient. If you're going to pack away more carbohydrate, then if you're not using insulin, you clearly will need more water. You've got to make sure that you've got enough water. Okay? Difficult to do when you're putting all that food away, I get it. My best advice is this. Before you even start loading on your load day, get 1.5 liters. Maybe even 2 liters. And at least that way, now you've got water in you. And another 15, 20, 30 minutes later, you can start your load. You're already ahead of the game 1 liter or 2. Okay? Don't drink water with your food. That's pretty much my #1 rule. You're already full from water. Okay? You're full from water. You're full from food. I'm ahead of myself. You're already full from food. You add water to that. It's like adding water to a freaking sponge. Especially when it's carbs. Okay? Carbs are like, just consider carbs sponge material. You add water to them in your stomach, it's doing this shit. Okay? You do that, obviously, takes up more space, you're going to be miserable, all that good shit. Let the food dissipate. Try to take in anywhere from a half liter to a liter about 30 minutes before you're going to eat again, maybe 45. What you have to be careful of, you got to play around with this a little bit, is sometimes you can feel like, okay, I'm getting hungry. It's like probably 30 minutes before I'm going to eat again. Stop taking this water. You're taking the water. You're like, oh my God, now I'm full again. And it won't go away. So you have to give a little bit of time. You do that 10 minutes before you eat, you're not going to eat. Why? I mean, it's one of those old things, old rules of trying to make your meal make you more full and satisfy you more, is they would always recommend you drink, 8 ounces of water 10, 15 minutes prior to a meal. That's why. Okay, it will tend to make you feel, maybe not from the brain to the stomach as far as satiating and you being satisfied, but as far as you feeling physically like, wow, I'm full, it will give you that feeling. So you'll have to play around with the timing a little bit. But I guarantee that if you try to drink that water with your food and with your meals, you ain't going to get as much water in as you need, or you're going to get the water in and it's going to go against and get in the way of the amount of food that you can actually eat. So you only have so much space there, okay? You can take it up, you can go 50-50 food, water, you can go 100% food, 0 water, or you can go 100% water, 0 food. I mean, there's only so much room, okay? So you got to try to be as efficient and as plentiful as possible. Get that water in between your meals closer to your next meal. And that way, because it's closer to your next meal, the water should move through and out of your stomach quicker than if there's a bunch of food in there. Sodium intake is hugely important. I did not cover this in the regular skip load chapter, so I'll cover it now. Sodium helps to pack away carbs. Okay, it makes the process more efficient as well. So, as an example, does not mean that if you eat carbs with water and take insulin that they won't be packed away as carbohydrate or as glycogen, because they will. But if you go sodiumless or you go with sodium, the sodium will make the process more efficient. Okay, anybody watching, and some of you may know, but I'll just reiterate, sodium helps to keep your muscles full. It does other things like increase contractile force and things like that within your muscle, but for the sake of loading, it helps to make the process more efficient. So salt your foods. You should be salting your food anyway, even on your daily diet to help keep you full, and contractile force, anything else, pumps in the gym helps with that tremendously. But it definitely needs to be in your loading protocol. So just to kind of rehash or go back over to clarify some points, start with a low dose with the loading. I say 5 IU. Okay? I don't think anybody needs to go any less than that. As long as you take it when you start loading in only 1 dose. And you may want to do that a couple skip loads just to get a feel for it, see how you feel, that sort of thing, and you can adjust from there. The other thing that's important to note with that first dose is don't take the dose and then make your food. Don't take the dose and then go to the cabinet and get your food. Okay? Have your food sitting in front of you and take the dose. Okay? Next question may be, or you may be asking it for the last 30 minutes, and that is what type of insulin to use and how do I dose it? How do I inject it? You can do it a couple ways. Okay? I've already alluded to the fact that I like fast insulin, so Humalog sub-Q, great. The problem with Humalog is you can't walk into any pharmacy and just buy it. You have to order it, have it mailed to you. There's questions as far as climate control, whether it was exposed to heat, because if it is exposed to heat, room temperature is fine. For any of you who think that your insulin has to be refrigerated all the time, or, oh shit, I left it out for a day, like, oh, I'm sure it's dead. It's not dead at room temperature, okay? Diabetics carry their insulin preloads and stuff like that at room temperature all the time, and they're fine, okay? it's not room temperature that degrades insulin, it's heat. So if you leave it in, on your dashboard, in an eyeglass case, or something like that, it's gonna probably be dead. Okay, not necessarily, but the likelihood of it, it's pretty common. Leave the, leave the bottle in sunlight for any length of time. The whole bottle is probably gonna be dead. If it's not dead, it's gonna be degraded to the point where you might as well get another one. Okay, you don't want to use something, whether it's insulin or anything else, and go, gosh, I sure hope it's good. We don't do that with testosterone, or you wouldn't do that with growth hormone, so don't do it with insulin, okay? Especially when insulin is so retardedly cheap, which I'll tell you about in just a minute. The other option that I recommend is use Humulin R or Novolin R, okay? Main reason is it's easy to get. You can walk into, at least in the United States, you can walk into pretty much any pharmacy, ask for a bottle of Humulin R, and they'll hand it to you and you pay for it. The problem is this: Humulin R, because it's a designer drug, is about anywhere from $150 to $200 a bottle, which will last you a long time. It's not that it's necessarily a bad deal, but if you go to Walmart and get Novolin R, which is the generic version of Humulin R, you'll get it for $25. And I will thank a client of mine who shall remain nameless so that I don't, incriminate. I don't know how I would incriminate him. It's not illegal, but nonetheless, I didn't come up with that. My client did, which I appreciated, because my dumb ass was paying $175 for Humulin R when I could have paid $25 for Novolin R. So I highly recommend that that's the route you go. There's no difference in the two. $25 is, big. There's a big disparity between $25 and $175, or even $200 for that matter. You dose the Humulin R or Novolin R IM with an insulin syringe. Okay, dosing Humulin R. I gotta give credit. I'm always a credit giving son of a bitch. Dr. Scott Stevenson is the one who was very clear with me and let me know that the onset time of Humalog dosed sub-Q is essentially the same as Humulin R dosed IM. Okay, that means Humulin R or Novolin R dosed IM, say, insulin pen in the shoulder or in the whatever, in the bicep. I say something that's lean because you want to make sure it gets to the muscle. So, a 1/2-inch insulin pen is fine for that. You could probably even use a 3/8 if you just really bury it to the skin and that sort of thing. Just make sure it gets to the muscle, and you're going to have essentially the same onset time. It's going to be very, very fast. Then you don't have to order Humalog, have it come to your house, and or whatever else, and wonder if it's any good. You get it straight from the pharmacy. So the only other thing that I want to add with the insulin dosing is this, and I did it. I admit it. And you know what? It's embarrassing to admit, but I'm admitting it and passing this information on to you guys because I want you to know that anybody, really, as stupid as it sounds, anybody can make this mistake. And I'm also owning my mistake so that all of you, or all of the clients that I've had in the past who have made a similar mistake, don't feel that they're the only dumbass out there, that they're the only one who has done it. When you dose, and I understand how you're probably going to hear this and go, God, what are you talking about? That's so obvious. But it's not. When you are drawing up your insulin, you have to know when you dose it, and you're pulling it out of the bottle into the syringe, the insulin syringe. Do not ever use a 3 mil regular syringe that you would use testosterone with, because you cannot possibly measure IUs, or 1/100th of a mil with a regular syringe. Like, you can't. You have to use at least a 1 mil insulin pen, if not less than that. Okay? Every single mark on that pen is an IU. Every single tiny line is an IU. Okay, they can be called ticks. Some people call them ticks, whatever. That is one. Okay, this is where the mistake comes in. People look at it and they go, God, that's such a small, that can't be that. It's just too small. And then they go with 1 is 10, 2 is 20. And I just had a client do it. We were going back and forth and he's like, I just don't understand. It's only 4 IU. I don't understand why. I'm good at the start, but like 3 hours later, I come crashing. I got to just start eating carbs. There is a big, big difference between 4 IU and 40. And I have made the mistake myself years ago when I first started insulin, and I would hit that dose, and I would hit it sub-Q. And then I would ride my motorcycle to work that took about 40 minutes. And then the plan was to get the carbs at that point. Okay? I'm giving up a lot of information. I'm putting myself out there. Clearly, even just riding a motorcycle is physical enough that it will impact your blood sugar levels, especially if you have insulin in you. Okay? And I was on a super sport, most times doing 100, 120 in the left lane. There's a bit of, there's still physicality there. It's not like you're sitting in a car just chilling, I guess is the best way to explain it. I wasn't doing wheelies and I wasn't on a motocross track, but still, it's physical enough, especially when you got insulin in there. So I would get like halfway to work and I remember it being kind of cold and I had a Carhartt on. Because when you first get a motorcycle, your dumbass will ride it when it's even cold outside. When you've ridden for years, then you get picky and you only ride when it's warm. Like now, or when you can have your shirt off or whatever. But then I was bundled up and I was sweating into that Carhartt and I had to go into the convenience store and I start. This is in Aurora, Colorado. So if you know anything about Aurora, Colorado, they have crime problems there. So I go in and I've got my helmet on. I'm ripping my helmet off and I'm shoving Pop-Tarts into my mouth because I'm fucking sweating. I mean, I'm going hypo and it's bad. And I think it's only like, 5 IU because I've done 50 units or something and don't even know it. And I did this for like 3 weeks and I could not figure it out. Couldn't figure out what the problem was. And when I finally did, I just felt like the biggest dumbass ever. And maybe I was. It's a pretty stupid mistake to make. I certainly wasn't stupid. I didn't think that I was. This is when I started. I mean, it was the very, very early stages of me getting back into competing after a 10-year layoff. It was like 01 maybe, 2000, 2001. Only a couple of years later I started prepping people, that sort of thing. So I always use that as a lesson to people so that they don't feel that the mistake that they have made, and a lot of people do it. A lot of people have done it. You'd be surprised. Maybe somebody watching this has done it. So don't feel stupid if that's what you've done. I'm giving you this information to be crystal clear so that you don't make the same mistake. Because a situation like that, that's concerning. Okay, I can laugh about it now, but I damn sure wasn't laughing about it then because the potential, for something very, very bad, especially on a motorcycle. Hey, can you imagine? I go out, I just pass out at 100, 110 miles an hour. Never mind that it wouldn't matter if it were 30 or 40, I guess, or 50 miles an hour. I mean, you're pretty much dead. Even if I wouldn't, I'd be dead going into a coma and not coming out. That's possible too, just from the high dose of carbs. But I'm damn sure gonna fucking die if I'm driving a car, or potential for dying while I'm driving a car is high. A motorcycle is incredibly high. I mean, you put yourself in a really bad spot. And I can tell you this, matter of factly, the people who have died, and I've heard many, many stories, the people who have died from insulin use are actually not newbies. They're the veterans who have used it a lot, and they become complacent. Oh, yeah, I'm going a little hypo. I'll get some more carbs here. Just a second, we'll grab the mail first. Boom, gone. You'd be surprised, large majority, people who have used insulin for years Or you would think it'd be the newbie making the mistake. At least the newbie, when he makes a mistake, if he's paying attention, like I'm like, oh man, I'm going hyper. I got these carbs right now. The veteran is like, this has happened 100 times before. I'll get some carbs in a minute. I'm gonna finish taking a shit. Clunk. Die taking a shit, or go into a coma taking a shit. Yay. Yeah, it's pretty sight. Anyway, the bottom line with insulin and skip loading is this. You're going to get so much more, you're going to get so much more full, it's ridiculous. Skin splittingly full. It's just so dramatic, it's retarded. And I don't mean anything against any retards out there, but it's just retarded. You're not going to hold anywhere near as much sub-Q water the next day. So you may be thinking, okay, well that's cool, but what about loading for a show? I'll get there. Hang with me, I'll get there. And the reason that you're not holding as much sub-Q water is, again, because the process is so much more efficient. You're packing away more carbohydrates, so you're packing away more water. There's not as much water sitting around, sub-Q, bloating you, making you look like a doughy pig. What else? It does increase hunger a bit. I don't think it's something you can necessarily use as hunger, or to increase hunger is a better way to put it. Use as hunger, that made no sense. But you don't want to use insulin to increase hunger because it's not going to be that dramatic. But it does, because of shuttling nutrients quicker, it is going to help with hunger. So if you're thinking, well, I'm already getting in as many carbs as I can, really can't eat anymore. You might be surprised that when you start using insulin, that food is packed away quicker, and you may be able to get in an extra meal. And I mean, that can be substantial. I don't use insulin with myself or my clients pre-workout, post-workout, or any other time but skip loading. This does a couple things. Number one, you get the obvious huge anabolic effect. You're obviously packing away a ton of carbs. You don't become, or you're not as likely to become, insulin resistant because it's not a frequent, you're using it for one day. Okay? The concern in the past that I always had was, God, how much dosing is too much? Like, how many workouts can I dose this before it starts to become ineffective? And let's be honest, it's a guessing game. We don't really, it's not like all of a sudden you go, oh, insulin isn't working anymore. You don't know that. You start to get an idea. Your head starts to play with you. Yeah, you can get a little fatter, but that's not always the best indicator either. So doing it once a week with the skip load does keep you, in my opinion, far more sensitive, okay? Because you're using it less frequently. It also is much easier on your pancreas, in my opinion, and I'm not a doctor and I don't play one on DVDs, but in my opinion, it's easier on your pancreas because the pancreas during a normal skip load is essentially probably getting a little sluggish. I mean, it's got to kick out a lot of insulin that it's not used to because the rest of the week, the body and the pancreas is dealing with low GI carbs, much lower carbohydrate intake, that sort of thing. And then all of a sudden, one day, bam, oh, look at all these carbs. Holy shit, I got to dump a bunch of insulin, which is why a lot of people claim to be very, very tired, especially when they first start skip loading. Okay? It gets better after a few weeks, but those first couple, they're like, oh my gosh, I had to lay down and take a nap. Well, your body isn't used to that. It's not used to packing away a ton of carbs at once. Okay? So this exogenous dosing of insulin is going to take that burden, or a lot of that burden, off of your pancreas and adjust blood sugar levels without your pancreas getting sluggish or lethargic or bogged down. Okay? Now, whether in the end that's less of a risk to become diabetic later because your pancreas is not, being overworked, that I don't know. I'm not real sure. I'm still looking into a lot of this because there's a lot of information out there that's quite fascinating. But obviously there's not a lot of information on bodybuilders using these compounds to get leaner or get bigger. I sure wish there was. I think the information out there, studies, if you will, are what we're doing right now. Guys like myself who are doing these things, clients who want to also do these things, and then we're able to sit back and evaluate as best we can. Are they well-respected studies that are listed in, JAMA or something like. No, they're not. They're not. But this is the best way that we have to learn. Okay, it's just trial and error, and the large majority of what I know is from trial and error. It has been for 30 years or 32 years that I've been doing this. Now, it's always nice when I do something and I come to a conclusion that I feel very good about, and 5 years later, studies start to back it up. That's awesome. I'll get people who will hit me and go, hey, this study says this. Oh, really? Well, I knew that shit worked 10 years ago. I didn't know why exactly, but I knew that it worked. So thank you for the study. Yeah, I feel so much smarter. Or at least maybe not smarter, but I feel like my time wasn't wasted, and it's nice to know, it's flattering to know that you weren't wrong. So, in a nutshell, we just have this insulin combination with skip loading. It's just been huge. When you're lean, and this is what I noticed it the most, coming off of taping the training footage for this DVD, wasn't shredded. It wasn't contest ready, and I wasn't supposed to be. That wasn't the intent. It's TRT bodybuilding. Whether I compete again is yet to be seen. I am thinking about it for the challenge of doing it just with TRT. But whether I do or I don't, that condition when I was training or doing the training footage was pretty good. I was pretty lean. I was in pretty good shape. So coming off of that, as I started to add some calories and was sick of dieting, I was able to, and I didn't increase calories a lot, I was able to start that insulin protocol pretty heavily. And when I say heavily, consistently, I guess is the best way to put it. I had played around with it prior to that, and this is just a couple months ago, when I did the training footage. I know it looks like it all runs together because it's in one DVD, but that's not how it works. That was three months ago. But anyway, since then, consistently staying there for a while. For almost 2 months, I held the same body fat level and put on 12 pounds over the course of about 10 weeks. So I just got fuller and fuller. I essentially felt like, and this is it's a bold statement to make, but I really believe that you can stay at your level of leanness, maintain a level of leanness, and combine skip loading with insulin, and I think that you can remain lean throughout the week and grow in that day and a half that you're loading with insulin. And I realize that's a pretty bold statement, but I've since also had clients who have responded the same way. I also have switched a lot of my prep clients to not using insulin at any other time except their skip load as well. And that's been going on for like a year and a half. And almost every single client has come back and said, I am way stronger, far more full than I've ever been during any other prep before. And the cool thing is at least a handful of these people I have prepped for 2 or 3 years. So I can see the difference. It's not like they came from working with someone else and I completely changed the protocol, the dieting protocol, the gear protocol. A lot of this stuff is the same. They're used to skip loading. We know, and they know, and I know what the response is typically that they get from skip loading without insulin, or what their dieting protocol is, and their gear protocols are a lot of the same protocols as well. They may have different dosing, but by and large, it's probably 90% the same. Those are my principles. Those are my dieting principles, my training principles, my cardio principles. So a lot of my clients who've been with me for a while, they're doing a lot of that same thing. And when you go and you change what is essentially only 1 or 2 variables, you can clearly see whether it's working or not, and you know if it's working or if it's not working, that the variables that you changed impacted that change. So it's pretty clear to myself and to a lot of my clients who have used it that the insulin skip loading protocol is huge. It's just huge. And I'm going to continue to play with it. If I happen to do a show next year, hypothetically, I would certainly use the same protocol, because that's the one thing I haven't done. I have not used it specifically for skip loading Used insulin specifically for skip loading during a prep phase. I've used it to get leaner, and I've used it coming off of a lean phase, like I said, after the shooting for the training footage. But I haven't done it yet with a prep, even though I've seen my clients do it with great success. So that pretty much wraps up the insulin skip loading. I threw a lot of information at you. I understand that it's a long chapter. I apologize. I just feel like there's a lot of information there that I think a lot of people want. I have held out and have not written much about it. The supercompensation glycogen storage compound, SCGS, supercompensation glycogen storage, SCGS compound is what I call it. I have touched on it in my elite FTS coaching logs, but I haven't been terribly detailed because I didn't want to give out all that information in bits and pieces throughout different coaching logs over 3-4 months. So I throw a little bit out there, kind of a teaser, that sort of thing, get everybody paying attention to it, or wondering what the supercompensation glycogen storage compound is. If you're wondering, it's clearly insulin. I don't want to put the word insulin into my Elite FTS logs. That way, if you know what it is and you know it's insulin, you've got experience with insulin and no problem. If you don't, I don't want people to be influenced by my articles to go, oh, I think I want to use insulin, when I'm not able to give away specific details that they can come away with to do it and use it safely, and to be able to build and experiment on their own. It's a big responsibility when you put out information like this, to put out responsible information, to also provide what can happen if things go wrong, how to be very, very careful, and at the same time, so that you don't make any mistakes. You're careful, and that nothing happens. Quite frankly, I would feel terrible if the information I got out, or that I gave out, were to ever cause someone to have any type of health concern, or worse, quite frankly.